everybody.
Oh, you
Welcome
just
to
posted that
another
thing.
episode of the Atlantic Bushcraft Adventures. Tonight, episode 56. And we're going to be talking a little about fishing. And joining us tonight, we have Gary, who we have mentioned many times here on the podcast. So why don't you say hello, Gary? Tell us a little bit about yourself for those that don't know you from being on the YouTube channel.
All right. Well, I have a YouTube channel, NovaScotiaCFisher.com. And I love fishing, so I've done everything from tournament fishing to backcountry stuff. And I guess since the older I get, the more the backcountry bushcraft fishing is where I find my most enjoyment now. So.
All right. Well, the name of the game is, of course, fishing season is just around the corner. And fishing, in my eyes, being an integral part of bushcrafting. I mean, it's something just awesome about getting out into the woods, doing a little camping, and throwing a line into the water. And we were joking just before we came on. Not that I am necessarily a master fisherman, but it's still very relaxing, very enjoyable. Now, Ben, on the other hand, he might be a master fisherman. If anybody remembers our very first video we did from our very first camping trip, Ben actually did really well at doing some fishing at the waterfall there using nothing more than a hobo rod, being basically an alder, some line that I think you brought with you, a hook, and what did we use? We used pepperettes for the bait, and I think we ended up using Baby Bell wax for trying to make lures and floats and spinners and a bunch of other stuff out of it.
Yeah, we definitely did. We definitely had the baby bell wax going, and I've done that a few times, and it's been somewhat successful. Is that all audio coming through? Because I'm having some issues here.
Everything sounds good on my end, Ben. What about you, Gary?
So far, so good.
Perfect. Okay. I don't know why everything went quieter from my phone. Okay.
Nope. Everything seems good. I checked it. All our numbers still look good, so I think we're all right. But yeah, fishing season, of course, just around the corner. I think for us, is it April 1st, Ben? Or 15th?
I wouldn't be as sure. Gary would probably be the expert on that one. Is it April 1st we can fish?
Well, it's kind of dependent on where you're. It used to be April 1st everywhere. Now it's depends on where you're at, I guess. I think out Robert's Way, it's probably April 15th. Somewhere up around there, it switches over. Trout season around Ben and I would definitely be the first. And some places are open year-round now, so you technically have gone fishing today.
And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, once again, Gary, you know more about this. Is there a difference between inland water and open water and stuff like that? Because I know that played a lot of part in it. I mean, it's been a long time since I've gone fishing right the first day of fishing season. I know, guilty. But it's usually not until about May I start going out, unfortunately.
There's certainly a difference between salt and fresh. The Northumberland Strait has some special regulations. The Minas Basin Bay of Fundy has others. But for our inland waters, which is what's controlled by the province, everything else is federal. You're looking at, most people think of trout fishing, so you're looking at April 1st or the 15th, depending on where you're at.
So let's kick the topic right off. What's your favorite thing about fishing? I mean, not just out bushcrafting and fishing, but what really draws you towards fishing? Because I know if anybody follows Gary's channel there a little bit, you do have a fair amount of fishing videos and stuff up there, doing some ice fishing and some stuff like that.
I don't know. It's just all part of the outdoor experience for me. Much like bushcraft, I learned that from my father, who, I went back to his place where he had a camp set up. And by camp, I use that term loosely. But he had everything done up in sticks, his tables and everything. And that was all to go fishing and or hunting. So, I mean, I've been introduced to that since I was probably 4 or 5. So it's just been a way of life for me.
What about you, Ben? Same question. What draws you to fishing? Obviously being the better fisherman.
I mean, I kind of got to say fairly similar. I can barely remember us building our first cabin, like with my parents, and it was right on a river. So from a very young age, we were given fish rods and said, the river's there. Keep yourself occupied till it's dark. And that's basically how I spent a lot of my days. And even like around the same time, me and one of my cousins, we would grab a couple of rods and head to one of the local rivers from my hometown. And we'd be gone all day, like, a couple of sandwiches, a bicycle, and a couple of fishing rods, and we were good for days. We would go, parents would see us basically when we left in the morning and when we came back in the evenings. And we'd travel rivers just catching fish, whether we came back with, a dozen trout or none. We were having a ball out there catching fish and traveling the rivers and learning what we could. So it was, for me, a big part of the early experience, and sadly something I've veered away from, and only really started again last year with any real try. I've done a bit at my cabin that I have here in Nova Scotia over the last little while, but the trip I did last year with Gary and the trip I did with you was some of the best fishing I did in years before that. So, I mean, we got a few trout on that river, and with Gary, I got my first pickerel, was it a chain pickerel or whatever it was?
Yeah, and bass, for that matter.
And bass. I'd never caught either of those fish that I knew of. What I caught at the cabin, I think we figure is white perch. And strangely, I know a lot of people say they fish here a lot and they know everything about fishing. I take a photo of a fish and show it to them. They're like, I'm not sure. So even like people who claim to be experienced fishermen around here oftentimes don't really know what they're catching. If you show them pictures, they can't differentiate one fish from another. So I found that interesting. I don't know. But now I have Gary. I just send the pictures to Gary. He tells me what I'm doing.
Well, it's even bass have been in Nova Scotia since I think it was 1943 in Yarmouth County, but the predominance of anglers have never fished with them.
Yeah.
Chain pickerel only really became widespread maybe in the last 10, 15 years. So if you grew up fishing in Nova Scotia, wasn't so far different than Newfoundland. Spent a fair amount of time in Ontario, and second that in Nova Scotia, we traveled to go fishing. So very early on, I got experienced with just about every species. There's still a couple that haven't seen in person, but very few.
Yeah, you both got me beat. I mean, it was real obvious that my fishing skills have dwindled over time, that's for sure. But something I fondly remember of fishing was much like yourselves. Growing up, my father and grandfather used to take me fishing a lot. I mean, I grew up pretty much in the sticks, and there was not a lot to do other than play in the woods and go fishing. I'm sure your guys' stories are very similar to that, and I mean, it just became not only something to do, but a way to relax and a way to just kind of get out and enjoy nature and just, I don't know, zen out, if that makes any kind of sense. Like, you could just, it's a different experience when you get into there. It becomes, for me, less about catching the fish and more about the experience of just getting out, having a little bit of fun, casting the line a little bit. In my case, usually losing a half a dozen hooks. And just enjoying the whole experience, really.
Yeah, I agree. It's always been a very calming get out there, and you can, you're casting, you're having a good time and all that. And you really don't need fortune to enjoy fishing. You can, fishing can go from as little setup, which was basic, a couple of cheap hooks, make your own stick, and you can still catch fish that way. Or you can go rod and a $500 reel, and I mean, does it change the experience? A little bit. Does it give you an advantage? Probably some, but in the end, the overall experience is still pretty good. It's what you want to put into it and what you can put into it. So to me, it's something that anyone can do, and that's what I really like about it. And there's so many aspects to it. Like for growing up, I always shoreline fished. So you're on the edge of the river, you're on the edge of the lake. But now with the canoes and kayaks that I have access to, it spots you wouldn't normally get to, angles you wouldn't normally try. So I really enjoy. And I know Gary's quite into the kayak fishing, so he's got quite an experience there and some pretty impressive rigs.
Yeah, well, you'd see with the guys that I fish with came from tournament back.
Yeah,
is the amount of rods we carry. I'm usually in the 8 to 10 range on the kayak, and that just, someone starts fishing, they catch their first fish, they run out the Canadian Tire, 17 different lures, they use them all. They'll find something they like and they'll stick to it. But even if I'll have 10 different things on, and it's a lot easier to reach behind you, shove one back, and just pull out another out. And backcountry fish now, backpacking with it, I'll usually take 2 in that situation, just because I'm so used to having that something switching back and forth.
If anybody out there is listening that's on here, lost in the backwoods there, looking at you, are you experiencing any audio problems there at all? I just want to make sure I'm clearing them up on my end and making sure everybody's getting their points across. I haven't noticed any myself, but I do know before this we were having a little bit of a problem, and just a second ago I had a little bit of a lag, so if you can get back to me, that'd be great. Yeah. Sorry to cut you off there.
For a second there, you glitched out there, Robert, for me. It was very electronic sounding.
Yeah, I'm adjusting some... stream keeps stuttering. So I was adjusting some of the settings and dropping the bit rates on the audio and the video a little bit to see if we could compensate for the loss here. You two just keep going on. I'll be back in 1 second if you don't mind.
Fine. Yeah. So, the battleship when we were camping, because you had the rod sticking out the back and you were floating above the waves, where me and poor Jeremy were kind of below the waves.
You didn't really have the kayaks for the conditions that we found ourselves in. If we had to do it over again, maybe we would have went somewhere else, because it wasn't overly comfortable for me. So I can only imagine the smaller. I'm used to going in the ocean, so.
Yeah. So my other rig, my 12-foot rig, would have handled that a bit better. And honestly, I had a few extra pounds leeway than poor Jeremy did. Jeremy was right on the weight limit of his rig, and I had about 30 pounds left on mine. And you could tell for sure. So that's an effect when you're going, is making sure you're equipped to deal with the situation you're in.
Yeah. And knowing when to, pack her in.
Pack her in.
Of us knew that we weren't going any further that day. But that made for a great adventure. We didn't get to a camp spot. You had hammocks, which was handy. If tents might have been a little trickier. A real good night in the woods, and we were safe. So,
yeah. And I think that's something to think about with a lot of this backcountry fishing. Not so much if you're fishing from your car. So if you're more or less within a few feet of your car, it's not something to keep in mind. But if you're going back any distance, you kind of have to be somewhat prepared to be stuck back there, because especially with a canoe or a kayak, is the wind hits the wrong way or picks up enough, you could be locked to the shore. until the wind dies down, which could be late at night or the next day. Usually I find in the evenings the wind does die down quite a bit, but then it's dark, right?
Most of our lakes in Nova Scotia are small enough that you can find your way around. But those, Kedgie comes to mind. That's a bear in the wind. Gaspereau is no treat in the wind either. Ainsley up in Cape Breton, shallow, huge lakes, and you have to respect them. They can get Rossignol, I guess, out on the South Shore would be the same way. It's big, shallow. When it gets windy, the waves go way up.
The lake I used to fish off of, I mean, I never really had the experience, and this is something I've always wanted to do, go back to Newfoundlanders, Red Indian Lake. I mean, that's 50 miles long, and at some of its widest points, it's probably 10, 15 miles wide. Like, it's a big lake. And I've seen the wind come up that thing and drive 12-foot wave. So when they would hit the breakwater in front of the cabins, it used to come right over the top of cabins. You could stand on the other side and get a shower. That's how hard they'd hit. And honestly, like, Gary, your rig would be almost useless in those kind of waves.
Well, I'd be wet for sure. The beauty of the sit-on tops is you take the plugs out and it's never going to fill with water. It just drains out. But
I beg to differ. I've sunk one.
That would be a neat trick, I would think.
Yeah, I could tell you the story. I think I've told it here before, but basically that the Sun Dolphin I had, interestingly enough, I read Sun Dolphin went out of business this year, just like last week. But the way they had the handles tied in the front and the back, and the fish pole holes in behind your seat weren't sealed. And so as the waves came over the boat, it kept basically ingesting water, and it got heavier and heavier. And at one point, the whole thing sunk to the point where it was just below the water, and I couldn't stay stable on it. And I was in Kedgie Lake, right across from Kedge Beach, I think it was.
Yeah.
And there's a big rock wall across that cove, and the wind was blowing right into it. That's where me and the canoe or the kayak smashed into. And I dragged it up, emptied it out of water, put all my gear back on it, and paddled the rest of the way out. But that was a trip between me and my wife, and hers, when I pulled hers up on the shore, when I got to the other side, and she just pulled it on the edge, hers was probably only a few minutes behind mine for sinking. So, if you have a rig like that, like I went through and sealed everything up after.
Yeah. I've never been a fan of that style rod holder. If you look at any of mine, I have tracks on them so that I can attach things externally, or I just have a ag crate that I've attached PVC pipes to, and that goes behind me, and it's, I can just pull that out, shove it in the back of the Jeep, and I'm good to go. So I don't have any holes that weren't already there, I guess, in mine. I really don't like the flush rod mounts where you just stick the pole in, because if you happen to hit a tree, there goes your rod behind you somewhere. It gets pulled out, and I tend to get myself into some situations where, it's thick or whatever, and I would lose rods or break rods that way pretty quickly.
Yeah, I can see the advantages. And in fact, I've set my daughter up with the same system on these little tiny solo kayaks. I have a little milk crate that I attached to the back, and she can put her backpack in there and a couple of rod holders, just like you say, PVC piping, and it works awesome. And it's just a couple of bunch of
They're not great for rivers. That's the only thing. When I go on a river, you'll see me in one of the other kayaks where I can keep the rods on the deck so that I'm going under stuff. Otherwise, my kayak's near useless in unless it's a big river. But, the rivers in Nova Scotia aren't big by and large, unless you're talking maybe the Mire or something like that up in Cape Breton. But as far as mainland Nova Scotia, my kayak doesn't like that water. My main kayak, I should say.
Mm. Well, you both got me beat.
So
I very rarely boat fish.
I keep telling you, I'll sell you one.
I know you do. I know you do. Right
Sounds
now
like
it's
he
not a
has
great
a fleet.
time, but I still have a plan.
I've been looking for a nice 12-foot canoe.
Hmm. You can't really beat a canoe for a lake or something like that. They're not bad in a river. You get a flat bottom one, they're pretty nimble. But I think you guys are on spot with the kayak. I never had a whole lot of experience with a kayak until you and I went out. And I am really impressed with how maneuverable and just durable and where they'll go. Like, you need practically very little water to run a canoe. Or, sorry, a kayak. The only downside is the lack of gear space as comparative to a canoe. But
Well, I mean, even that, I mean, my kayak can take 500 pounds of gear. To me, the downside is if I had my way, I'd have a 12-foot, what are they, the Swifts Canoe Company in Ontario that they weigh like 30 pounds. It's portaging them. If you're going from lake to lake, canoes, that's where canoes outshine kayaks.
So
as far as gear storage,
I built a yoke.
all that.
Oh yeah, you did. You showed me those. Those were neat. Not the yoke.
built a
Sorry,
yoke.
the little trailer you have.
Yes, I showed you in my cart, but I also have a yoke built. It mounts right onto my kayak. I put it on my shoulder just like a canoe and carry it around. It's quite a neat little rig, and they sell a similar version, a commercial one. But it basically is just a yoke with a couple of legs, and the kayak straps down to it. I ran a bungee cord over the top, bungee cord, a ratchet strap, pulls everything up, and it works great.
Yeah, I've seen those. I still think that the canoe, that's where the canoe still outshines. I mean, we can jerry rig. I can make it work with my smallest kayak. When I'm using that smallest kayak, I'm usually wishing outside of the rudder, because having a rudder on a kayak makes a huge difference fishing wise. I'd much rather have a little canoe for that specific. Like, I have a trip planned in April, if we're allowed to go, that I'll have to take my 40-pound kayak. I'd be better off with the 12-foot canoe, but I'm not going to pay the price tag for those right now either. So, because you're looking at probably $4,000 or something like that for these lightweight models now.
Yeah, they can get real expensive real fast. Now, you said if you're allowed to go. Is that because you're thinking that the pandemic may be holding things up, or just...
Well, there's a lot of mixed messages out there. I mean, you hear, stay home. If you have to drive, you're going too far. I've talked to my MLA and a few people in the municipality because of my position here in the community, and it seemed like everything's okay, but I mean, we could have a nationwide lockdown tomorrow, so that would definitely change everything. So I'm hoping to go, but we'll have to wait and see. I'm also in healthcare, so
you're in pretty high demand at the moment then.
Yeah, I've already got called in for the first time I've had overtime in years, so we'll have to wait and see. I'm really hoping, because I don't know about you guys, but I've been sort of chewing at the bit for a while now. I have different options, whether it be stream fishing without the kayak or doing some backcountry kayaking, but both would work for me. I just, at this point, want to get out.
So let's talk fish. What's your favorite fish to fish, Gary? And then you as well, Ben.
That question gets asked a lot, and it's a hard one to answer. Because I prefer fishing in the backcountry. If I had to pick a favorite fish, it would be brown trout, which isn't in the backcountry, which is more around your big rivers. And here in the valley, it's the Cornwallis. There's plenty out on the Northumberland Strait side of things that have them in. But I'm in love with the big brown trout, if I can get my hands on them. I also fish for them probably less than all the other species, but there's nothing quite like catching a big brown.
Is that just because of the actual catching of the fish or the fight of the fish, or is that because you just prefer brown trout to eat?
Well, I don't eat them very often. They grow quick compared to your speckled trout. So, I probably average in the area of 20 inches as far as length. But they're smart. They're the ones that are in, you have to really sneak up on. Most of the time I'm fishing from the bank. They're in brush piles. They're under. I caught a big one. There's actually a video on my channel from last summer where I basically went out to take a few casts and was trying out one of my own dehydrated meals. And while it was sitting in the cozy, I went and took a few casts, and a 4-pounder or 3.5-pounder came out from under my feet and hit the lure like 6 inches before I had it reeled in. And it was just an amazing fight to it, I guess. But outsmarting them, if you outsmart a big brown, you've really done something. Where there's times where brookies are hard to catch, or bass or pickerel, but by and large, if you're going fishing for one of those species and you're going to a spot where they're at, you're going to catch them. Brown trout, not so much.
Yeah, I was going to say, here's one for you. Now, here locally, there's a river that runs just up the road a little bit towards Park Falls area. If you walk that river, you can literally see the brown trout in the river, and we're talking, like you said, 20, 22, 24-inch trout. You absolutely cannot catch them on a worm. A buddy of mine and me, we fished all day, and we were literally bouncing the worm off their head, and they just ignore it altogether. Sometimes they'll bite fly, but they're real hard, tricky fish to catch, and if you move too fast, of course,
I've never caught a brown trout on a worm. I've probably caught every other fish on one, but I've never caught a brown trout on a worm.
So can we ask what you use, or is that giving away trade secrets?
If you're seeing the fish, go back at night. If night fishing is in that river.
Night fishing is not legal.
Sound is definitely dying.
Actually, a lot of the rivers that have brown trout in Nova Scotia are legal to fish at night.
Oh, okay. I'll have to look into it.
So it would depend on the river. But you do have 2 hours after sunset, too, so you have a fair amount of time. But I know some on the Northumberland are open for night fishing. If you can see the brown can see you. But if you can't, or if you're really sneaky and had to fish during daylight, a Rapella. Nothing beats usually a brown trout color Rapella.
Fair enough.
I can virtually guarantee you that April 1st, I'll have a brown trout Rapella on.
And what about you, Ben? What's your favorite fish to fish if you had to put one out there?
I think I'd have to go with what we called the mud trout back home, which is probably somewhere around a speckled trout here, I guess. But yeah, because we only had 2 trout that we ever, or fish that we tried to catch in our rivers in Newfoundland, and it's kind of the I don't know, nostalgia, I guess, of it. But we caught Winnenish, which I think is basically a landlocked salmon, and the mud trout, and the mud trout was the better tasting of the 2 fish. The salmon would be once it had gone to sea and come back, but the landlocked ones were they were very like a whitefish and didn't quite have as good a taste as the nice red on the speckled. So that was my favorite. Now I'm getting to try a few things up here. It could very well change soon. Because I'm really enjoying some of the fight and opportunities that I never really had growing up with such restricted options of catching fish. I mean, there are fish species available here. And that's probably why I haven't fished as much here, is because everyone was telling me, oh, you need this to catch that. You need the shad there to catch the shad. You need the shad to catch the stripers, and you need this and you need that, and I got completely confused and lost. And then hear people saying between this fridge and this fridge you can catch 2 fish, but outside of that you can get 4, and the rules seem daunting to me.
Yeah. It's really not that complicated, though. And what I tell a lot of people is that we're so lucky in Nova Scotia. If you want to go fishing today, you can go catch a fish today. I said I love brown trout fishing, but I don't do it very often. It's because I do it at a very specific time of year, which is usually probably twice, but the first day of April, first couple of days of April, and then a little bit in May. Once it gets to like after the first week of May, I'm going to go shad fishing for a bit. What an awesome opportunity we have here to catch poor man's salmon. Basically, they fight like the dickens. You can catch lots. I think the 9 Mile River up your way has them. We certainly have them in the Annapolis here in the valley. And then right on the heels of that, it would be flounders, stripers. No matter what time of year it is, there's something that is going. So I'm very much dependent. Like there'll be a day I'll wake up and it's almost like a smell to the air, and I can tell that's a brown trout day or it's a brook trout day, and I'll go to where it'll be appropriate for that species. You know, once it gets hot, you're looking at smallmouth bass and stuff like that, and you'll find them in a lot. Like you have a cottage or camp. If you did have any amount of trout in that lake, you wouldn't see them in the summer anyway.
No.
Now you mentioned
you're saying that would be the time to try. Well, not this week.
Come April or whenever the season first opens.
Oh, I'm very interested to get up there now that I know what's in the lake.
Well, like I've said to you before, the offer's always open, and we're up there almost every weekend once it gets warm enough that we can stay in the cabin without freezing to death. I mean, we were up a couple of days ago just to check it out. The cabin's fine. It's ready to go. So any day now, as soon as I'm sure nothing's going to freeze, I'm going to hook the water up and be out there every weekend I can. If they're going to let me travel.
Well, yeah, it's crazy.
We traveled down there last weekend for a day, and then like the next day they put place on emergency and saying people shouldn't be doing that. And I'm like, I never seen anyone. I drove for an hour and a half, got to my cabin, there's nobody there, and I'm still isolated with the same 5 people I'm isolated with, right? Regardless, but.
And I was gonna say that's still kind of your property. So don't get me wrong, I don't read legal term overly well because it's written by lawyers for lawyers, but would there be an argumentative case there that you're just going to check on your property? Because I mean that's legit this time of year, would it not be? Or is that kind of floating through a gray area that's unethical?
I don't know if it's floating through a gray area, but I mean I'm a little hesitant just because I don't want to. I know a lot of people are tired of hearing of the COVID and all that, but right now if I get the coronavirus and I keep it to this area, it's one thing. But if I travel down to Bridgewater and then I stop into the mall to grab a few extra groceries to go to the cabin, now I've potentially spread it to Bridgewater. And then someone in Bridgewater goes back to Yarmouth. The next thing you know, the whole province is infected, and I'm getting the blame for it all.
No, and it's a very valid point.
Yeah. And I've already made plans, especially with gas the way it is. A lot of my fishing is in Digby, Yarmouth County, which is an hour and a half, 2 hours away from me. Making that, I have to, if I decide to go, just to be responsible, I'm going to make sure I have a full tank of gas so I don't have to stop for gas. I'm going to take whatever I need for that trip so that I can make it down and back.
Yeah.
And that's fair. One of you, I can't remember which one it was now, smallmouth bass. It's a fish I have not actually had the opportunity to try fishing yet. I hear it's really caught on in the last couple of years quite heavily in my area anyway. I'm sure it's been popular everywhere else. I know Shubenacadie used to be a big place for it, but what can you tell me about that? I hear it's a real fun fish to catch. A lot of fight to them.
Absolutely. particularly big smallmouth bass. Ben had the opportunity to get out with Jeremy and I. I caught one decent fish, and we were in a body of water that has a lot. So, I mean, Ben can speak to whether he enjoyed that experience. That's a great way to start out. I'd very much love to get him down to our camping area down Digby Yarmouth way and really show him what smallmouth bass is really all about. When you put your average up 1.5 pounds heavier than every single fish.
Yeah.
But they're awesome. As long as your tackle's matched up, and I guess that goes for most fish. If you're not taking a striper rod out there, they're going to be a blast to catch.
All I can picture is this one time, a couple buddies and we're talking back when I was a teenager. A couple of my buddies and I, we went down to a place that was called the Red Banks or the Salmon Hole, whatever you want to call it. If you're from the area, you'll know exactly where I'm talking about. If you're not from the area, it's not going to mean anything to you. But anyway, me and two of my buddies were down here fishing, and we only had 2 reel poles between us and an ice fishing pole. And anyway, we used this ice fishing pole, and we managed to catch a slink salmon. We didn't keep it, of course, but you want to talk, yeah, very similar to what you got there. And you want to talk about something that was hard to take in on a ice fishing pole was a slinky salmon. And that's kind of what I picture, the way everybody describes smallmouth bass to me, that's exactly what I'm picturing. It's like this unreal fight. Is that accurate?
It's because it's not legal in most places. But your Atlantic salmon, if you ever were to hook one on a spinning rod, I've caught one instant. There's no comparison to the battle that they put up. A smallmouth is going to be a far shorter fight, but you're going to have a blast. Particularly if you can get into a situation. And the same with chain pickerel, where they're taking top water. That's really where they really shine when they're if you're in a spot that has good numbers of big fish, and we're fortunately in Nova Scotia, we have lots of those areas. And I mean, you can go home with sore arms, which has happened to us several times where we've caught so many that our arms are dead by the end of the day. And you just, there's just not the numbers. People think they're easy to catch. Just any fish species, the big ones are not. But where their numbers are up, you're going to catch more of them. That's just the way it is.
And that's the thing. The numbers have been increasing the last year pretty exponentially, have they not? Like, I know you used to only be able to catch them in a few areas, and now they've opened it up everywhere. And the regulations are not hard to follow. They're just a little different if you're not used to them, and I recommend everybody checks the book. But
that's mostly because that's not because they're Western Nova Scotia. The valley has always had good numbers of fish. The Grand Lake Shubenacadie system always has. It's the cottage industry. People buy cottages and they go out to their cottage during the summer. It's fishing. They can't catch fish. They're either all gone or it's too hot. And then someone makes the decision to go to the lake next door, grab a bucket full of small bass, and the next thing you know, there's bass there. I mean, there's been a lot of harm done by, and some of those are probably well-known fishermen too, who knows, but they're spreading because people are moving them.
And that's fair. I mean, that's, I guess that would technically make it an invasive species for a lot of those areas then?
Oh, yeah.
Smallmouth bass were introduced to Nova Scotia in one lake in 1943 in Yarmouth County. They were put in the valley when they were dammed up because they realized it wouldn't be a more once those power dams were put in. A lot almost all I think Grand Lake, Shubenacadie was legally done, and a little lake that Ben and I attempted to ice fish on, smallmouth bass were legally entered. But the other 1,000 lakes are from illegal introductions.
Mm.
And chain pickerel's even worse. When I started fishing, there was no chain pickerel in the HRM. Now they're holding tournaments in the HRM for ice fishing and pickerel, and they're catching, like, I think they caught 98 pickerel in the little pond there off Micmac-Banook this winter in one day tournament. They weren't there.
That's crazy.
My memory, they weren't there. They were mostly down in Yarmouth, Digby.
So you've had some experience ice fishing now, Ben. I know you have tons, Gary, but what's your take on ice fishing for people that haven't tried it? I myself have only ever ice fished once when I was 12, 13 maybe, and that was down in Cameron's Lake.
Folks tend to sink when you drop them in a hole.
What's that? Yes. I heard about the little incident. But, yeah, what's your take on it, Ben? Because have you done a whole lot of ice fishing in Nova Scotia previous to that?
This was my first attempt in Nova Scotia. I did a lot growing up. I still think it's black magic. I've never caught anything under ice. But I've tried. Like, I have tried seriously. And like, on open water, I can cast in. I got pretty good luck. Like, I pull fish out. I'm not the best fisherman in the world by any means, but I have decent luck. But ice fishing, no, it's voodoo. I caught one bite, like something grabbed hold of my line when I was out with Gary, and then Gary got some. Later, neither of us pulled anything out. We took out and went.
We weren't fishing. I mean, it's almost like fishing during the any other time of year. We didn't fish the bookends of the day either.
No.
Middle of the afternoon is not going to be a great time. Both of my hot tent trips that I went on fishing this year, I caught my before that.
Yeah.
And it's never lake first thing in the morning because I was usually cutting wood to make sure I had a wood supply to keep myself warm at night. So
I gotta say, this year coming, this winter coming, get the hot tent out and hot tent next to a lake and do some ice fishing. That seems like an awesome system to do. It just didn't happen this year. But that's going to be a game changer for me for fishing. Do that in the winter. And
I think it was for me this year. I accept that as anyone that tries solo hot tenting back in the woods goes, it's a tremendous amount of work for one person. So I wasn't getting 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So like if 2 or 3 of us was to go to the same, work on wood together, we'd be able and a few rabbit snares like I did or whatever. Like it's hot tenting by yourself in the winter is a heavy workload.
Yeah, it has its own advantages. I prefer camping with some. Not that I'm against solo camping, but part of it is the social aspect for me. Part of it is, sitting around the fire and chatting with someone. When you're by yourself, it's a different experience. It's definitely an enriching experience. I'm not knocking it in the least, but much prefer to have someone there to talk to and chat with and learn with. When I went with Robert, I mean, we made whistles. I think that was one of the highlights of his year last year.
Still the highlight of my year for this year.
But
I sort of had to get used to the solo camping because, I work shift work. I'm in healthcare. I don't have a schedule. Like even you and I trying to match up is easier said than done. So you sort of had to get used to it. I mean, when I first met you at Gaspereau Lake, well, it was that spring that I did the video at Gaspereau Lake where I hiked into it and fished the river going into it. And I listened to like the first 7 or 8 podcasts of you guys that night in my hammock, because you kind of have to learn how to entertain yourself, especially in the winter when you might be in the freaking tent for 16 hours. But I think that first night I listened to, I think, 8 of your guys' episodes that night.
And he's still sane,
that was
Ben.
interesting. Well, when I met Gary,
pretty quick,
he actually this podcast that he was listening to, and I'm like, that's my podcast.
That's awesome.
Well, Jeremy didn't fill me in who the third guy was.
No.
Surprise.
Well, I thought you and Jeremy were good friends for years. He's like, yeah, my buddy Gary's coming. Oh, okay. He's got a buddy named Gary who's going to. But none of us had ever met up until that moment. Like, we met taking boats off the boat, heading in. They're going to spend 2 nights in the woods with each other. Well, one for Gary, because he had to go to work the next day. It was and we've talked pretty regularly ever since. Gotten out for a few trips now. It's been pretty good.
Most of the guys I fish with or camp with, most of the guys that I fish with over to this, which is really what I enjoy, like going out somewhere, pitching a hammock or a tent or whatever and fishing and maybe doing some kayaking or canoeing or whatever. They like the fishing part of things. But almost I have some way, shape, or form. It used to be NovaScotiaFishing.com, ran by a guy out in the South Shore, Dave Doggett, who's a licensed guide in Nova Scotia. That's how I met a lot of people. Now it's been Nova Scotia Bushcraft, places like that. I mean, it's like-minded individuals now. As soon as I found out who you were, I immediately recognized Robert because at the gathering I attended his fire making thing the year before or whatever, and then you held the competition where no one could start a fire with that day because of the humidity or whatever.
One person almost. Almost.
Close, yeah. But there was some pounds lost that day by those gentlemen.
Oh man, it was hot and it was humid, and I in hindsight I know what went wrong there, and I would change things differently going forward again. Never should have got those guys to try and do that on the grass. Never should have tried to get those guys to do that on the grass. But anyway, that's a story for another day. Yeah, it's kind of a small world, though. I remember you actually telling me about that, Ben, that you were going out with Gary, and then you're like, yeah, he was listening to our podcast. And I'm like, cool. And here I thought we were just talking to ourselves for a lot of the time.
We found the one viewer.
One guy. No, that's awesome. But, yeah, so we're coming up on about the 50-minute mark, gentlemen, so we should probably try and wrap it up a little bit before everything crashes out on us. It seems to have been going so fairly good now that I turned the bit rate down, but what's your final thoughts, fishing? Why don't you lead us into that, Ben?
I mean, for me, it's a great pastime, especially when you're doing these backwoods trips. Because for me, that's the big thing, is the backwoods camping and stuff. But with fishing, it gives you something to do. It's a pastime, and it potentially puts food on your table. But it adds to the experience. It definitely enriches the whole camping experience, and it's a great skill if you're into the survival side of this thing. If you can fish, you can eat. You can eat. You can last a long time. Watch any of the survival shows. That seems to be where they all go to. Catching fish is key to survival. So for me, it's an awesome skill to learn. It's a very enjoyable skill. Once you get it, I mean, you'll be hooked for life. Pardon the pun, but it's fitting.
Pun intended.
You, Gary?
Yeah, I mean, again, I just think we're so lucky in Nova Scotia to have the resource. You hear a lot like, oh, well, there's no trout anymore, or there's no this, or there's no that, and I can go 5 minutes. My biggest speckled trout last year was caught 5 minutes from my house. And I wouldn't say there was woods around for probably 20 minutes. There's a lot out there, and anything that enhances my enjoyment of the outdoors, I'm all for. So when I go camping, yeah, I want to be able to fish. If you looked at me 10 years ago, I probably released 99.9% of my fish. Now I look forward to that little bit of a shore lunch. I take very few home, but having a shore lunch out in the woods over the fire, it's all part of the experience to me. And if I can get out with some friends and share that, then all the better. So hoping for more of that this year for sure.
Awesome. Well, anybody out there that's listening, thanks for joining us. I am going to give Gary a chance here to tell us a little bit about his own YouTube channel there. So if anybody that is listening to our podcast wants to check him out, very knowledgeable man, has a lot of great episodes up there on YouTube. So why don't you tell us your channel name, a little bit about what it's about, although I'm sure people have guessed seeing you're on our show.
So the channel's Nova Scotia Yak Fisher Outdoors, and it's really about anything that I do outdoors. A lot of it has to do with fishing. I did do some snaring and stuff this fall that I haven't done for years, but it's about the stuff that I enjoy doing. You're certainly not going to see professional editing. I'm learning as I go, but I found that I'm enjoying the ride, so to speak. So I'm not expecting anything from it, but as long as I enjoy doing it, and I hope some people get enjoyment out of some of my adventures and misadventures. And if we ever get through this, hopefully we'll have some more in the very near future to come. So.
And if anybody wants a direct link to his channel, I'll put it in the description of this video once it's finished processing, so anybody can find him there. Once again, be sure to like, subscribe. I know you hear that every time you go onto YouTube, but be sure to like and subscribe our friends here, because, I mean, it's people like Gary, Jeremy, when we joke about him, stuff like that. It is definitely a community-based group. I know that's wholly Department of Redundancy, but I'm at a loss for the words I want to say, but we all kind of help each other, support each other, and it's really about being in the group that really makes all this work. I mean, we wouldn't have met Gary, I wouldn't have met Ben without doing stuff like this. So it really does support us a lot. We're not looking to get rich. Don't ever think we're trying to do that. Maybe Jeremy, but no, we're in it for the love of it. And as Gary said, professional editing. If they're coming to our channel, you can guarantee they're not here for the professional editing. Hopefully they're here for the experience and a little bit of knowledge. But thanks for joining us, everyone. This is our first time we've had a guest on, and I hope Gary joins us again. And if it's something you're interested in, I know we've had a little bit of technical difficulty here because this was the first time we did it, but I'm sure we'll get it smoothed out. And if you'd like to come on and chat a little bit, be sure to drop us a comment, email, all that fancy stuff you can find on our channel. So, once again, thanks for joining us, everybody, and everybody have a good night.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, like I said, Gary.
Pleasure. Glad you could do it. And yeah, thanks for everyone who listened. We look forward to next week. Take care. I'd love to say get out there, but with the present climate, whatever you can do to keep yourself safe until you can, please do it.
See you.